Are there advantages to aging? Yes, I am Debbi-Jo Horton, and welcome to Advantages to Aging. Join my guests and I as we discuss aging and what makes for a healthy lifestyle, which results in a quality life. Thank you for joining me today. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Advantages to Aging. And there are so many advantages. Today, I have a multiple-time author, 9 amazing books published in 4 languages, is another one coming out. Please welcome Stan Goldberg, PhD, who is going to be launching his 10th book, Preventing Senior Moments, How to Stay Alert in Your 90s and Beyond. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you, Debbie. It's great being here.
Oh, awesome. I love, so, listeners, the one super advantage of doing this podcast is I get to meet so many incredible people, and Stan is definitely one of those people. His knowledge in senior moments and focusing on those advantages to aging is outstanding. And I wanted Stan to come on here to really talk about what senior moments are, and are they really inevitable? Like, are we all going to face that? And are there ways that we could prevent those moments from happening? So, Stan, I'm going to let you tell us, are they inevitable?
No. And let me go back to a story that initiated my interest in senior moments. This was a number of years ago, and I was driving with a very good friend of mine in North Carolina. And this is when Halley's Comet was circling the Earth. And so we looked up and we saw the comet. And I said to him, Rich, how far away is the comet from here? And he said, I'm going to make up a number, but it's something like 600 million miles. So I went, is that from here or from your house? And I realized what a ridiculous thing I just said. And I wanted to know why. Why did something like this happen? And that was the genesis for me looking into not only how the aging brain works, but also something specific like senior moments. And what I found, the first thing I did was I wanted to see, well, what's been written about it, both in terms of popular material and scientific research. Now, what I found in popular material is that 99% of everything that has ever been written on senior moments viewed them as humorous. And looking at the scholarly material on senior moments, I found nothing. So I thought this seems to be a fairly interesting area to get involved in, and it was also one that would help me avoid making embarrassing statements like I did about the comet. So I started looking into it. And what I found is that there were lots of myths about senior moments and very little understanding about them. And so that's where I began the research, looking at the myths. What are those things that we keep telling each other and telling ourselves about senior moments that are not true?
Interesting. Yes, there are a ton of myths. And I bet, as you said that, every single one of our listeners thought of one immediately. But let's talk about whether or not we can prevent those senior moments from happening. Are there strategies or ways that we could, really take a positive approach or a proactive approach? Because a lot of my listeners are in their 30s and 40s. So hopefully they're not having too many senior moments yet. Although those moments have been called parent brain.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and actually that's another one of the myths that the senior moments tend to occur or only are related to people who are aging. There's no starting line for when senior moments begin. They occur throughout our lives. What's interesting and what's most important in preventing them is to have a clear understanding of what these things are. So the first thing that I found is what we want to do is we want to identify the type of senior moment. I mean, what you read, people talk about how humorous and how embarrassing these things are, and they don't really talk about, yeah, but what differentiates something like getting lost in a mall and forgetting where you put your keys. They all can be parts of senior moments, but they're all different types of events, each one caused by different circumstances. So, for example, if you look at senior moments, you can break them down into 9 different types. Now, we don't have time to go over all of them in detail. That's in the book, but let me briefly just list them. The first one, the most common one, is forgetting names and numbers. Then the next one is repeating stories or asking questions. Third is replacing objects. Fourth is substituting words. Fifth is sequencing problems. Sixth is difficulty completing tasks. Seventh is conflating memories. Eighth is difficulty understanding. And ninth, and the most difficult one, is disorientation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to identify the type of senior moment you're having.
Mhm.
Once you look at that, then you want to look at possible reasons for why they occurred. Senior moments can't be blamed on aging. That's like saying, you get a heart attack by eating the wrong foods. That's not sufficient. All senior moments, are not caused just by memory problems, but rather by problems people have in how they process information. Now, if we look at information processing, what we find is that there are 5 steps. If you have an error at any one of these steps, guess what? You're prone for a senior moment. So let's look at these 5 steps very briefly. The first one is attention. You have to attend to something before you can do anything with it. The second is understanding what you just attended to. The third is storing that information. The fourth is then retrieving it and finally using it. So if you have a problem in any one of these areas, there's a good chance the response that you're going to have is going to be different than the one you intended, and ergo, a senior moment. Once you've gone through this, so we now have said, okay, let's look at the steps involved in getting rid of or preventing these. First thing we've identified is the myth, and that is that all senior moments are the same and inevitable. We throw that out. After that myth, we then look at, okay, so if we're going to know something, if senior moments tell us something about how we're processing information, let's look at the stage at which a problem is occurring. So let's take a very simple example: losing your keys. I mean, how many times a day do we go through a process of saying, "Where is my keys?" And you do it day after day after day. Well, what you need to look at is, okay, if I'm losing my keys, what am I doing wrong in order to lose them? And let's say the case is impaired attention. You place your keys somewhere when you were exhausted or ready to go to sleep, you're running around, you have 10,000 things to do, you're getting ready for work, and you go to the door and no keys. Well, what we see then is that my impaired attention affected my ability to find the keys. So now we're ready to say, okay, we know all this stuff. What can we do to prevent it? And here comes what I call strategies. A strategy basically is a way of doing something that will allow you to change many different behaviors. So the strategy we're going to use for remembering our keys is something very simple. We're going to make the action lasting. We seem to want to depend upon our memory or our brains to remember things. But that's fleeting. What's better is to take something that's concrete. So let's say I know that for the last month, I keep losing my keys 3, 4 times a week. Well, what I'm going to, and I think it has to do with my attention span. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 4 by 8 piece of pink paper and I'm going to put it down where my keys usually are, and I'm going to put my keys on top of it. Very simple. You do that, you will never lose your keys. So it's the strategy. And then, I would not expect any of my clients to continually put pieces of pink paper under things they don't want to forget. You eventually phase that out, and there's strategies for that as well. So that's the process. It's a very simple process. It's one that people can do on their own once they understand what's involved with it, and it's extremely effective. I'll give you an example of why I know it's effective. I didn't have as much problem forgetting my keys or losing them as I did remembering 3 things I needed every day I walked out of the house. I needed my cell phone, I needed my keys, and I needed my wallet, period. If I left without any one of those, I was in trouble for the day. Obviously, keys, I couldn't get into the car.
Right.
But so what I did was I put a number 3 above the door, the front door. And that said to me, hey, you need 3 objects before you leave the house. I did that for a week consistently. By the second week, I didn't, even though that number was still posted, I didn't need to look at it. Because what was happening is in my brain, I was creating memories. And each day I did the activity, I reinforced that memory to the point that even if I didn't look at that number, if the number wasn't there, if I left the house and I didn't automatically check in my pockets for those 3 things, I knew something was wrong. Anybody can do these things.
Yeah, so it's really kind of like building those habits that become
Absolutely.
rote that you don't even think about them, you just automatically do them. Interesting. So I have a question. So if you aren't driving, do you still make sure that you have your keys? I know sometimes once you create that habit, it sticks.
Yeah. And actually, there in one of your podcasts, you talked about memory and how not being aware of something can result in problems. And you're absolutely correct. One of the problems people have is when they think about memory, they combine everything together. Everything is memory, and if they're making distinctions, they might make a distinction between short and long-term memory. But there are many other types of memories. So memory, although memory plays a part in the creation or memory problems create a problem in senior moments, it's not exclusively what causes them. And in terms of memory, what helps with memory is when you start doing a behavior that you want to remember, it needs to be done an enormous number of times and consistently. I have a neighbor who used to sing in the San Francisco Opera. And I asked him, I said, you sing opera in 6 different languages. You obviously don't understand 6, but how do you do that? And he described the process that most singers use when they were going to memorize. So you start with 1 bar, and that's like a section of music, and there's words listed there. He will go over that maybe 10 or 15 times, just the 1 bar. Then he adds the second bar, and he does that 10 or 15 times, and he keeps building and building until he has the whole thing memorized. What he is tapping into is what we know on how memory is strengthened. What happens in the brain, and again, and when I say what happens, this is conjecture. Most of the stuff we think we know about the brain is indirect evidence. We really don't know what's going on there. It's like in the 1950s, there was a psychologist named B.F. Skinner, and he had this theory called the black box theory. And he was a behaviorist, and essentially he said, we know everything that happens up to the point that it goes into the brain, and we know what comes out of it, but we don't know what happens inside. So when I say that we know, I'm using Skinner's black box. I think we know. A memory, so you engage in an activity. The mind then takes that and divides up all of the different parts of it into sensations. So in one part of the brain, in the visual cortex, for example, certain visual components of what you just experienced will be stored. The same thing will happen with sound, with touch and smell. Well, when that happens, we now have it's almost like a Picasso painting where it's all divided into cubes. So everything is there. It's all laid in the brain, and it's fairly ephemeral at this point. It's not strengthened, although having all of the modalities working together helps. But now you go back and you keep repeating the same thing. What'll happen is that memory gets very strong. So with me and the three objects that I would needed to leave the house, every day I did that, that memory of where these things are and what I should have grows stronger. You can do that with everything.
Yeah, really interesting. There's so much, you're right, that we don't know about the brain, but there's so much that we do know, which just kind of reaffirms that there's a lot we don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, Debbi-Jo here with Neura. Neura's age-fighting products use the best innovations and ingredients from nature and science to deliver a holistic, all-around approach to anti-aging. Whether you're young and interested in taking preventative steps or young at heart and need to address sunspots and lines, Neura's products work for all ages and skin types. Back to the show.
So more and more of us are living longer and longer. What is, in your opinion, the brain's ability to process information changes?
Uh, Interesting question. Up until a couple years ago, neurobehaviorists and neuropsychologists were convinced that when brain cells die, they die and nothing replaces them. And as you get older, if cells die for various reasons, you're going to become more cognitively impaired. Well, what they found is it's not true. They did studies with people with Alzheimer's. And what they found is that through various activities, new neurons and new neural connections can be made even in Alzheimer's patients. So, this was astounding to many people. The idea is if you can have new growth of these beautiful cells in people who are definitely impaired, what about those of us who still don't have dementia? And there was an article that was published, and I wish I had the reference, and I don't offhand, but this was by two researchers that looked at the components. What are the components of cognitive behaviors that require some intellectual thought? And there was about 5 or 6 of these. And they included things like, the ability to adjust, the creation of new connections, and was 4 or 5. And I looked at this and I said, geez, these are identical to what occurs in creative activities. So I started looking into more of the research, and what it appears is happening if a behavior has certain characteristics, for example, those that are cited in the article that I can't remember, it is more likely that they will result in the development of new brain cells and connections rather than just sitting on a couch and watching reruns of Law and Order. Amazing. So, if you think about how this relates to aging, it's very simple. If you want to age gracefully, effectively, comfortably, you need to do activities that will increase the number of neurons in your brain and the number of connections. So that's that's the easiest thing I share with people is get off that couch and start doing things that will protect your brain.
Mm. I find the study of the brain and the more information that we find about how the brain works so fascinating. And I love that Stan's upcoming book, Preventing Senior Moments, How to Stay Alert in the 90s and Beyond, really is going to help us to kind of like look through that window into how our brain processes information and be able to really age more gracefully, as you said. So, if there's one piece of advice that you could give our listeners, other than buy your book, because I know they're going to go do that they could start putting into practice today, what would that be?
Understand that the brain is a flexible organ. It not only controls all aspects of the body, it affects what we believe, it affects how we perceive the world around us, it affects our relationships with other people. If you want to age gracefully, take care of your brain. You can take care of it in a number of different ways. You can feed it the right types of food. You can keep it hydrated. I mean, people think about staying hydrated for their muscles. They never talk about hydration for your brain. And it's important. Do that. Become proactive. Look at the research on aging. Getting old doesn't necessarily mean you become impaired. I think what's beautiful is to look at the difference between, and I don't say this in a political sense. Look at the difference between Nancy Pelosi, who is nearing 90, and how sharp she still is, and someone, let's say like Mitch McConnell, who is now having strange issues with his brain. So I'm not saying that, that good nutrition and proper hydration, gave Nancy the ability she has, but rather there are so many things we can do to stave off deterioration that will cause not only senior moments, but other more serious things that, we ignore them at our own peril.
So very true. So exercise your brain, give it the proper food, give it the proper hydration, and live a healthy, mindful life. Thank you, Stan, for being such an amazing guest. Listeners, I cannot wait to hear your feedback. Don't forget, find the link in the show notes. Go grab a copy of Stan's book. And until next time, I'm your host, DJ Horton. This is Advantages to Aging.
Do you think one of the biggest advantages to aging is all the knowledge we gain along the way? Me too. What did you learn today? Share with me in my Facebook group with the same name as this podcast, Advantages to Aging. Now hit subscribe so you don't miss all the tips to come in future episodes.